Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sweet Revenge. My name is Lena Carter. I'm 34 years old. And if someone had told me a few years ago that I would wake up in a hospital bed with my newborn daughter in a NICU across the hall while my own mother was sitting in a casino ignoring every call, I would have said that kind of thing only happens in movies, or to people who must have done something to deserve it. But life has a way of proving you wrong in the quietest, most brutal ways possible. And what hurts most is not just what happened that night, but how normal everything felt right before it all fell apart. As if I had been living inside a story I refused to read properly until the final pages were already burning. It started long before the accident, long before the hospital, long before I ever became a mother myself. It started 9 years earlier in a small apartment in Portland when I was 25, just out of college, holding my first real paycheck in my hands and thinking, for the first time in my life, that maybe I was finally free to build something that belonged only to me. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed staring at the number on my phone like it was a symbol of possibility, not realizing that within a single phone call that same night, my entire financial life would quietly be rerouted into something I didn't yet have the language to question. My mother called me just as I was about to go out for dinner, her voice already trembling before she even said my name. And when she finally spoke, she told me my father had suffered a stroke, that it wasn't catastrophic, but it was serious enough to shake the ground under their lives, and that the medical bills were already piling up in ways they couldn't manage because the insurance wasn't enough, and the mortgage was behind in everything. She said everything was falling apart at once. There was a certain rhythm to the way she spoke that night, a kind of emotional precision that I didn't understand at the time but would recognize years later, because she knew exactly when to pause, exactly when to let her voice crack, exactly when to let silence do the work of guilt. And I remember gripping the phone so tightly my fingers went numb as she explained that they didn't know how they would stay afloat, that they might lose the house, that everything they had worked for could disappear if someone didn't step in. I asked her what she needed because that is what daughters are trained to say in moments like that. And there was another pause, longer this time, almost hesitant, before she finally said $2,000 a month, just for now. Just until things stabilize. Just until they recover. And she added quickly that she hated asking me, that she knew I had just started my life, that she wouldn't ask if there was any other option. But I was the only one who could help them. I agreed before I even had time to think about what I was agreeing to. That night I set up the first automatic transfer, sitting alone in my apartment with my laptop glowing in the dark, telling myself it was temporary, telling myself it was responsibility, telling myself it was love, because that is what I believed daughters were supposed to do. And when my mother called again after I confirmed it, her voice softer now, almost relieved, she told me not to mention it to my father because it would upset him, that he would feel ashamed, that this would stay between us. And I remember thinking that secrecy was just another form of protection, not realizing it was actually the first thread being tied around something I would spend nearly a decade trying to escape. In the beginning, it was small enough that I didn't question it. I adjusted my budget, I worked extra hours, I told myself I was just helping my family get through a difficult phase, but the phase never ended. Instead, it grew. Every year there was another reason, another emergency, another bill, another crisis that somehow always required a slightly higher amount. 2,000 became 3,000. 3,000 became 4,500. And every time I hesitated, every time I tried to suggest reducing it even slightly, my mother's voice would sharpen just enough to remind me what kind of daughter I was supposed to be. And somehow the conversation would always end with me apologizing for even asking. What I didn't see at the time, what I refused to see, was how the story of struggle never applied equally to everyone in my family. My sister Alyssa was always thriving, always evolving, always finding herself through new courses, new trips, new clothes, new opportunities that somehow always aligned perfectly with my mother's explanations about where the money was going. Meanwhile, I was the one working weekends, skipping vacations, delaying my own life decisions, telling my boyfriend Ethan that we needed to wait just a little longer before thinking about a house or a future or anything stable, because I wanted to make sure my family was secure first. And Ethan, to his credit, didn't push too hard. But he noticed the way I would go quiet every month after the transfer went out, the way I would tense up when my phone rang and saw my mother's name, the way I kept shrinking my own life without ever calling it what it was. There was one Thanksgiving that still sticks with me. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because it was the first time someone outside my family said something that made the illusion crack. We had visited my parents' house in Sacramento, and I remember sitting at the dinner table, listening to my mother talk for nearly an hour about Alyssa's latest achievements, her followers, her potential, the way she was building something big for herself, while Ethan sat beside me quietly, observing everything. On the drive back, he finally asked me, very gently, why my mother never once asked how I was doing. Not even out of politeness, not even out of habit. And I remember laughing it off too quickly, saying she was just busy, that she had a lot on her plate. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true, because I could still hear her voice from earlier that day, animated and proud, speaking about my sister as if she were the center of the universe, while I had sat there like a detail that didn't require attention. And somewhere in that same period, my grandfather called me. I hadn't spoken to him in years. My mother always explained his absence in simple terms. He was busy, he was distant, he had his own life. He wasn't really the family type, but when his voice came through the phone, it didn't sound distant at all. It sounded careful, measured, almost like he was choosing every word before he spoke it. He asked me if I was happy, and I remember how long I hesitated before answering, because something about the question didn't feel casual. And when I told him, yes, of course I was, he went quiet for a moment and then said something I didn't understand at the time. If that ever changes, you call me. Promise me that. I promised him, because it felt easier than questioning why he was asking. And then I let the conversation fade into memory like so many other things I should have held on to more tightly. Looking back now, I realize that was the first moment someone tried to pull me out of a story I was being taught to stay inside. But I didn't listen. I kept going. I kept paying. I kept believing that loyalty meant silence and silence meant love. Until the day my body finally forced me to stop moving forward, and everything I had been avoiding collided at once, in the most irreversible way possible. It happened on an ordinary night in Seattle, the kind of night that doesn't feel like anything important is going to happen. The kind where you're tired in a way that has become normal, and you stop noticing how deeply exhausted you really are, because it has been your baseline for so long that it no longer registers as anything unusual. I remember leaving work later than planned, still thinking about emails I hadn't answered, still mentally running through deadlines and appointments and small responsibilities that all felt urgent in their own quiet way. And I remember the rain starting just as I got into the car, heavy and relentless, turning the streetlights into blurred halos and making everything outside feel slightly unreal, like the world had softened at the edges. I was 36 weeks pregnant, my body heavy in a way that made even simple movements feel deliberate, and I kept one hand instinctively resting on my stomach as I drove, feeling the small, steady presence of my daughter, trying to imagine what life would look like when she finally arrived, trying to picture myself as someone who was calm and prepared and ready for motherhood, even though the truth was I felt like I was constantly catching up to my own life. I remember the traffic light turning green at the intersection near Maple and 5th, and I remember thinking briefly about how I just needed to get home, just needed to get out of the rain, just needed to sit down for a moment and breathe. The truck came from nowhere. I didn't even have time to process what I was seeing before it hit. There was a sound, metal collapsing into itself, glass exploding outward, something deep and violent that didn't feel real at first, because my brain refused to accept that something so sudden could actually be happening to me. The impact threw everything out of place at once. My body jerked forward, and then back, the airbag deployed with a force that felt like a second collision. and for a few seconds there was only noise and light and pressure and the overwhelming sensation that the world had split open. And then there was silence, but not the peaceful kind, more like the absence of everything familiar. I remember trying to breathe and realizing I couldn't properly. Each inhale felt sharp, wrong, like something inside me had shifted out of alignment. My chest burned. My ribs felt unstable, as if even the smallest movement might break something further. My vision blurred in and out, and through the cracked windshield I could see rain continuing to fall as if nothing important had happened at all, as if my life hadn't just changed shape in a single instant. Somewhere far away I heard sirens. Then closer. Then voices. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Hands reached in through the broken door. Someone was cutting my seatbelt. Someone else was saying I was pregnant, that they needed to move quickly. I tried to speak, tried to tell them to check my baby first, but no sound came out. My throat felt useless, disconnected from everything else. The only thing I could focus on was the weight of my own body and the strange, terrifying uncertainty of whether she was still moving inside me or whether I was already too late. The last thing I remember before everything went black was someone saying, "We need to get her to surgery immediately." And the feeling of being lifted away from my own car, away from the rain, away from everything I had been trying so hard to hold together. When I woke up, it wasn't gentle. It was fluorescent lights, sharp and unkind, and a pain so immediate that it took several seconds to understand where I was or even what part of my body was still intact. There was a tube in my throat, machines beeping around me, and the sensation that my entire chest had been rebuilt incorrectly. I tried to move and couldn't. I tried to speak and couldn't. Panic rose slowly at first, then all at once as memory returned in fragments, rain, impact, screaming metal. My daughter. My daughter. I remember my hand flying instinctively to my stomach before I even fully understood what I was doing. And the emptiness I felt in that moment was so immediate and so absolute that it stole whatever air I had left. A nurse appeared beside me quickly, speaking softly, telling me I was in the ICU, that I had undergone emergency surgery, that I needed to stay still. I couldn't respond, but my eyes must have given me away because she paused, then said the words I needed most and feared most at the same time. "She's alive," she said quietly. "Your baby girl is in the NICU. She's small, but she's strong." Something inside me broke open at that sentence. I don't know how long I cried for after that. Time didn't feel structured anymore. It came in waves and fragments, in sharp returns of awareness followed by exhaustion that pulled me under again. Eventually the tube was removed, and when I finally tried to speak, my voice barely existed. It sounded like something had been scraped raw. "Where's my husband?" I managed. "He's on his way," the nurse said. "There was a flight delay. He'll be here as soon as he can." "And my mother?" I asked, even though something in me already didn't want to hear the answer. The nurse hesitated just long enough for me to understand. "No one from your family has arrived yet." That sentence didn't feel real at first. It just hung there in the air, too simple to fully absorb. I had just given birth. I was in critical condition. My daughter was in the NICU, and no one from my family had come. I asked for my phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. There were no missed calls from my mother, no messages, nothing. But there was one notification I will never forget. An Instagram post from my sister. A photo on a cruise ship. Bright sun, a drink in her hand. A caption that read, "Living my best life." I stared at it for a long time without blinking, feeling something shift inside me. Not anger yet, not fully, but something colder, quieter, like a door beginning to close somewhere deep inside. And then I saw the bank app. For years it had been routine. Automatic. Almost invisible. Money going out every month like clockwork, like breathing. I opened the transaction history without thinking, and there it was. 9 years of it. Month after month after month. $4,500 leaving my account and disappearing into something I had never once been able to clearly define, only accept. My fingers hovered over the settings for a long time. And then I stopped the transfer. The confirmation screen asked me twice if I was sure. Both times I pressed yes. And for the first time in nearly a decade, nothing moved out of my account. I remember putting the phone down and staring at the ceiling for a long time afterward, not feeling victorious, not feeling relieved yet, just strangely empty, as if something had been removed that had taken up more space in my life than I ever realized. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything truly began to change. The hospital room felt different after that night, as if time itself had stopped pretending to move in a straight line. My body was still healing slowly, broken ribs binding themselves back together, my lung recovering in painful increments, bruises fading from deep purple to yellow. But the real recovery wasn't physical. It was something quieter, something internal, like waking up from a long sleep and realizing the life you thought you were living had been built on a story someone else was writing for you. Ethan stayed with me every day. He would sit beside the NICU window for hours, just watching our daughter breathe through tubes and monitors, as if every beep was proof that the world still had something good left in it. And my father came too. Quietly at first, standing in corners like he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. Until one afternoon, he finally sat down beside me and said, in a voice I had never heard from him before, "I'm sorry I didn't protect you." He didn't explain it, and I didn't ask, but something in that moment shifted between us. Like a door that had been closed for years had finally cracked open just enough for air to pass through. My mother didn't come, not when I woke up, not when my daughter stabilized, not when I was finally allowed to hold her for the first time, trembling and exhausted and terrified that I might somehow break her just by touching her. There were no messages at first, only silence. And then eventually a single voicemail that arrived days later, her voice tight and controlled, saying she had been busy dealing with things, that I should understand, that she would come when things calmed down. But nothing about her voice sounded urgent. Nothing sounded like a mother who had almost lost her daughter. It was my grandfather who came 3 hours after I canceled the transfers. And even now I remember exactly how he looked, walking into that hospital room. Tall, steady, carrying something under his arm that didn't belong in a place like this. He didn't ask how I was right away. He just looked at me for a long moment, as if confirming something he had already suspected for years, and then he pulled out a thick folder and placed it gently on the table beside my bed. "I've been watching," he said quietly. Those words should have scared me, but instead they felt like relief. Inside the folder were years of bank statements, printed records, transfers I had made without ever truly understanding where they were going in full detail. He had tracked everything, every month, every increase, every pattern, and alongside it, notes, observations, a quiet, meticulous record of a family I thought I was protecting never slowly revealed to be something very different. "You didn't fail them," he said. "You were being used." I remember shaking my head at first, because acceptance felt impossible. Because if what he was saying was true, then it meant I had spent nearly a decade building my life around a lie that I had helped maintain. But he didn't argue. He didn't push. He just sat there with me, steady and calm, until the truth stopped feeling like something sharp and started feeling like something clear. The confrontation came later, and it didn't come from me. It came from Ethan. He had called my mother from the hospital that night, desperate, asking her to come, asking her to be there for her granddaughter who had been born early and alone in the NICU. And I still remember the moment he told me what she said, because it didn't sound like anger or denial. It sounded like inconvenience. "Paige always has these emergencies," she said. "She exaggerates. She always does." And then softer, almost dismissive, "Your sister doesn't have these problems." She was at a casino when she said it. The sound of slot machines was loud enough that Ethan could hear them through the phone. That was the moment something inside him changed too. Because he called my grandfather right after. And my grandfather came. And my father came. And suddenly all the people my mother had spent years separating began to stand in the same room. When she finally arrived at the hospital days later, it wasn't out of concern. It was calculation. I saw it immediately. The way she adjusted her expression before entering the room. The way she softened her voice like it was something she could turn on and off. The way she looked at my grandfather first, not me. "Lena, my baby?" she said, rushing toward me. I came as soon as I could, but no one moved toward her. Not me. Not Ethan. Not my father. Not my grandfather. And in that silence, she hesitated for the first time. My grandfather spoke first. "Where were you the night your daughter almost died?" Her expression flickered, just for a second. "I was dealing with your father's situation," she said quickly. "You know how things are." But my father shook his head. "She was at the casino," he said quietly. "I saw her location." That was the first crack. The second came when my grandfather placed the folder on the table again, this time in front of her. $486,000, he said. "That's what your daughter sent you, while you told people she was selfish." The room went still, and for the first time, I saw my mother without any performance left. Not the version of her that called me selfish daughter. Not the version that cried on cue. Not the version that always had an explanation. Just a woman who had run out of control. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. And then I said the words I had been carrying for years without knowing it. "I'm done." Not loudly, not dramatically, just finally. And somehow that was enough. The weeks that followed didn't feel like collapse. They felt like clearing. Like space being created where something suffocating had once been. My recovery continued. My daughter grew stronger every day in the NICU, until finally she was placed in my arms without tubes or monitors for the first time. And I remember crying in a way I didn't even try to stop, because it felt like something sacred returning to its place. My grandfather handled everything after that, quietly, legally, firmly. The financial structure of my life was rewritten. The will changed. Boundaries drawn in places where none had existed before. And for the first time, my money stayed where it belonged. My mother tried in fragments after that. Messages that started emotional, then turned defensive, then silent again. My sister tried too, but differently. She didn't start with apologies. She started with confusion, then anger, then finally something that sounded almost like understanding when nothing else worked. But I didn't rush anything. Healing, I learned, isn't a single decision. It's repetition. It's waking up every day and choosing not to step back into what broke you, just because it's familiar. One evening, months later, I was sitting in the living room holding my daughter while Ethan made coffee in the kitchen, and my grandfather was reading quietly in the corner chair like he had always belonged there, when I realized something simple but irreversible had changed. No one was waiting for me to fix them anymore. No one was expecting me to save them. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't living inside someone else's definition of what love required. I was just living. And that finally was enough.